You ever notice how every election year, like clockwork, every candidate's all, I'm going to fix education
Yeah, feels like we've heard it all before,
a
right?
million times, and then nothing. So today we're going deep on this whole education reform thing, starting with two pieces from the odd side.
Oh, yeah, those were interesting.
One by Peter Green, one by Bettina Love, and they're both like so frustrated that in this whole 2024 election, education's barely a whisper.
Yeah. It is kind of disheartening to see how little real talk there is about this, given how important it is. Both Green and Love, they're worried about this constant churn of solutions that sound amazing but then fizzle out.
Right, it's like the hype cycle on overdrive.
Exactly. And Love, especially, she brings up how these failed policies, they don't just disappear. They often hit students of color and low-income communities the hardest.
So it's not just lack of progress, it's making things worse for the kids who are already dealing with the most.
Sadly, yeah.
And then there's the blame game. Schools are failing, teachers aren't cutting it, students just need to try harder. Like, are we even looking in the right direction?
Right, like maybe we're pointing fingers at the wrong people. And that's where I found Jaime Hoerricks' article, The Accountability Grift, really interesting. It makes you think, hold on, what if we're totally missing the mark here?
Yeah, their take is pretty radical.
Instead of blaming schools and students for not making lousy programs work, Hoerricks says we should be holding the companies selling those programs accountable. Like, why aren't they on the hook?
Makes you wonder, right? In other fields, it's show me the results, then you get paid.
Exactly. Think about it. You wouldn't pay a contractor if the building they put up was, like, crumbling already.
Oh, for sure not.
There's this expectation that you got to prove your product is good. Horrocks uses some interesting examples from other industries to show this. Healthcare, for example. Hospitals, they actually get penalized if patients end up back in the hospital soon after treatment for the same problem.
So it pushes them to actually fix the problem the first time.
Right, it incentivizes quality care.
Yeah.
Or take software development.
Yeah.
A lot of times payments tied to, like, hitting milestones, proving the software actually does what it's supposed to.
Yeah, it's all about showing the goods, delivering on the promise.
Exactly. So Horrocks suggests we apply the same logic to education with something they call a pay-on-success model.
Pay on success. I like the sound of that already.
Basically, the companies selling educational stuff, they only get fully paid if their products actually measurably improve how kids are doing.
Wow, that would be a game changer.
It would. Instead of schools just buying whatever's shiny and new, this would give them power to demand proof. It flips the whole script.
Herx even uses a real-world example. iReady in the LA Unified School District.
Oh yeah, that's a great case study. They've been using iReady forever in LA, but their scores on the SBAC, those standardized tests California uses, they haven't budged.
So under this pay on success model, iReady's makers, they'd have to show their product's actually working.
Right. Or they'd need to give the district a refund or at least a discount. Makes you think, why isn't this already the norm?
It really puts the pressure on companies to go beyond just marketing hype. They'd have to actually prove their stuff is based on research and actually helps kids learn.
It's like saying, show me the data, show me the results, then we'll talk money.
And think about how this could empower schools to be smarter shoppers.
Exactly. They could say, look, if your product doesn't deliver, we're not paying full price.
This could really shift the power dynamic in education.
Absolutely. But like with anything, there's got to be some downsides, some things to watch out for.
Right. It can't be that easy.
Yeah. While tests like the SBAC are one way to measure things, they definitely don't tell the whole story. Like focusing just on test scores, that could end up pushing schools to just teach to the test instead of helping kids really understand things and think for themselves.
So this pay on success model, it's a good starting point, but we got to really think it through.
Absolutely. We got to make sure it actually leads to better education for everyone, not just create a bunch of new problems.
And that's what makes this so interesting to dive into. It's complex.
Totally. And that's a good thing. It means there's lots to unpack here.
It feels like we're always chasing the next big thing in education, right? Like, remember those brain training apps? Everyone was convinced they were going to, like, supercharge learning.
Oh, yeah, totally. And those apps, they kind of show what can go wrong when we focus on something just because it sounds cool and new without any real proof it works.
Right. All flash, no substance.
Exactly. So a pay-on-success system, that could actually push companies to focus on real results instead of just slick marketing. Make them prove their stuff is based on research and actually helps kids learn.
That makes sense. But how do we stop companies from, figuring out how to game the system? If they only get paid if kids hit certain targets, won't they just, like, teach to the test?
That's definitely a worry. It means we can't just use like standardized test scores as the only measure of success. We got to look at the whole picture.
So what else should we be looking at?
Well, things like how engaged students are, how well they can think critically, if they're getting creative, even their social and emotional skills.
Yeah, that stuff matters too.
Big time. And we got to make sure this pay on success thing doesn't end up hurting schools that are already struggling, like schools in low-income communities.
Oh, right. What if companies are less likely to work with the schools because they might not see those immediate results?
Exactly. That could make things even more unequal. You gotta be really careful about that. Maybe there's a way to have a tiered system so companies get some money up front, but the rest depends on how much progress each school makes based on where they're starting from.
So like a more individualized approach, right? Not just one size fits all.
Right. And that would mean taking into account all the challenges a school might be facing, not just assuming every school can hit the same targets in the same way.
It seems like the key here is finding that balance. We want to reward good outcomes, but we don't want to create a system where people are just cutting corners to get paid.
For sure. And we have to remember, the companies, they're businesses. They want to make money. So it's understandable that they might not be super excited about this pay on success thing.
I mean, yeah, it's a big change.
Yeah.
So how do we get them on board? How do we make this fair for everyone, for the schools and the companies?
That's the big question. Maybe part of the answer is to shift the focus from selling individual products to offering whole packages of support. Instead of just selling a software program or a textbook, what if they helped train teachers, offered ongoing support, and helped schools track the data to see what's working?
So it's more of a partnership, like the company's invested in the school's success long term, not just making a quick sale.
Exactly. And that ties into what Hoerricks was saying about moving away from this blame game. Instead of pointing fingers when things go wrong, everyone's working together to find solutions and make sure every student gets a chance to succeed.
So what does all this mean for our listeners? Like, why should they care about this accountability grift and this idea of paying for success?
Well, for one thing, it shows how important it is to really think critically about the educational stuff being sold out there. Don't just believe the hype. Ask questions. Demand to see the evidence.
Right. Don't be fooled by fancy brochures. Look for programs that have a real track record. And don't be shy about asking for help with implementing the program and tracking the results.
You have a say in how education works. You can challenge the way things are done and demand better for your kids, your schools, your communities. Don't be afraid to speak up.
This isn't just some abstract debate. It's about making sure every student has a chance to get a good education, the kind that prepares them for life.
And that means everyone needs to be accountable. The companies selling the stuff, and the people making the policies that decide how our schools run.
Yeah, it's a whole system. And we got to stop blaming each other and start working together to build a better system, one that actually works for everyone.
And Hoerricks' idea, this pay-on-success model, it's a starting point. It's a different way of thinking about how we fund and evaluate education. It's not perfect, but it's sparking some important conversations.
And it makes us think about who we're holding accountable for success and failure in our schools. So what do you think? Could this be the thing that finally shakes things up and makes real change happen? Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into Hoerricks' article and this whole paying for success idea, I want to leave you with one last thought. We've mostly talked about using this for curriculum and software, but what about other parts of education?
That's a good question. What about, teacher training? Could we use this pay-on-success model to make those programs better?
Or what about training for principals and school leaders?
Yeah, that could be interesting.
And what about the policies themselves? Could we hold the people making those policies accountable for the actual results they get?
Whoa, that's a big idea.
I know, right?
It makes you think about how we'd even measure success when it comes to policies. And who would decide if a policy is working or not. But hey, it's worth thinking about. If we're serious about making education better for everyone, we got to be willing to have these tough conversations.
I mean, it's a wild thought, right? Holding politicians accountable the same way we'd hold a company accountable.
It is. But think about it. What if that actually made them focus on what really works for kids?
Instead of just whatever sounds good for their next campaign speech.
Exactly. It would force them to think long-term, to actually solve problems instead of just slapping on a Band-Aid.
This whole conversation has really made me think about what success in education even means.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not just about test scores or how many kids graduate, right?
Right. It's about giving kids the tools they need to, thrive. The skills, the knowledge, helping them become the best versions of themselves.
So they can go out there and make a real difference in the world.
Exactly. And it's about creating a system that supports that, not just for kids, but for teachers, for principals, everyone.
Okay, so here's my takeaway for our listeners. As you're listening to all these campaign promises about fixing education,
Yeah.
remember this conversation.
Don't just take their word for it.
Exactly. Ask the tough questions. Look past the slogans, the sound bites. Really dig into what they're actually proposing.
And don't be afraid to speak up. Tell them what you think, what you want for your schools.
Because at the end of the day, this is about our kids.
Their success is our success.
And that's what it's all about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.